With MSONEWSports, I'm Rick Bourne. Happy now to be joined by Dr. Mario Motta, who is a cardiologist and an astronomer, and interest across the spectrum. Dr. Motta, thank you for taking the time this morning. Appreciate it. Happy you're here.
Good. Happy to be here.
All righty. First thing I want to ask you about is medicine versus astronomy. How did you get interested in either of them?
Okay. Well, that's a long story. Interested in both. And I couldn't decide, quite frankly. And the long and short of it is the medical school applications are due on September 1st. They still are. And the grad school applications are due December 15th. I got an early accepted at Tufts. And well, anyways, got accepted. So I went to medical school.
All right. Well, we have we're linked to your website, and your information is up there, and it's remarkable. I was expecting Mel Brooks and the 2,000-year-old man for all that you've accomplished in such a short time. So I
feel that way sometimes.
What's that?
I feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, me too. Okay, building a telescope. I can go on the internet and see how people do it. And I can get information. I can read about it. But that wasn't available when you started. How in the world did you get started and learn how to build a telescope?
Okay, well, it's a very simple answer. I built my first telescope at age 14. I was a teenager. When I was 7 or 8, my parents brought me the typical garden variety, small Japanese refractor. I quickly outgrew that, and I wanted a bigger scope. They were immigrants, poor immigrants, and needless to say, my mother couldn't afford the scope I dreamed of, but they were willing to buy me a bigger one. So I basically made a deal with my father. I took a little convincing. I said, I'll grind my own mirror. Just give me the same money you were going to spend. It took a few months of convincing that a teenager was able to do that, but they finally gave me the money. I ground my own telescope with the help of the amateur telescope makers of Boston. Paul Vallely back then was president, and he and the whole group is very accommodating to young people wanting to build telescopes. So I built a telescope, won a science fair with it, and I think it helped me get into college and medical school, quite frankly. So basically, it's much cheaper to build than it is to buy. That's how I got started. It was an 8-inch f7. I still have the mirror.
Is that right? Oh my goodness. I can remember when I first started getting interested in science. I was 10 years old in the International Geophysical Year. I was reading my weekly reader.
I was 57.
57, okay. Weekly reader, Sputnik, and all that stuff. And then I started looking up. I was more interested in flying than I was in learning about astronomy until later. What's your first recollection of looking up and wondering what was out there and wanting to know about it?
I was always interested in galaxies, quite frankly, which is why I always want a bigger and bigger telescope. So that's why my first scope was an 8-inch f7. So my observations were of galaxies right from the start. Wasn't so much interest. I mean, everyone's interested in space exploration and the Apollo program, of course, but my main interest back then was evolution of galaxies. And anyways, that has been my lifelong interest.
Mm-hmm. I like to. My favorite thing is to look at Andromeda, because you can see that. I can see it with the unaided eye, and I can see it with binoculars. But then to understand the size of the universe, or at least the size of our local neighborhood, it's mind-boggling. And as a math teacher, I can't get a hold of that. But I want to get back to your personal stuff. But what's your observations right now with the James Webb? Because I just saw an article just recently that it was able to detect carbon dioxide in a planet 700 light years away. But that deep space picture of all of the dots on there are galaxies. How do you look at that? How do you observe that? What's it mean to you?
Well, I mean, James Webb is a completely another level, and the main reason why it's gold coated is because they want to go into deep infrared, and that'll exceed the capabilities of the Hubble. The Hubble can only look back to roughly 12.5 billion light years, because anything beyond that has redshifted to the point where it's beyond the deep infrared. So by able to go into the deep infrared right from the get-go, it was able to see galaxies further out, because due to the expansion of the universe, what was emitted back then by the early stars is so deep redshifted that it's in the infrared and it can't be seen by visible light. The Hubble can only go into the near infrared. So by doing deep infrared, you can look further back in time by the expansion. You can look through dust and gas in nebulae in our galaxy that couldn't be seen by Hubble. Hubble sees the surface of the gas, but not inside. The Webb can see inside its star formation. And finally, you just mentioned a planet. Stars are very bright compared to the planets, but in the infrared, the relative difference in brightness is not that significant. Consequently, you can do planetary studies much easier than you can then with the Hubble. So that's the main reasons why the Webb is going to expand our knowledge.
Did you think the Webb was ever going to go off the ground?
I don't know. It's 20 years behind. But,
you talk and I want to ask you about your relationship with with kids and education. But just now, just in this 2-minute, 3-minute conversation, you've talked physics, chemistry, mathematics, and astronomy, and you have a grasp of all of those. And what do you say to kids who maybe don't have the interest to get into that? But to me, it's so important to touch on each of those things. You don't have to be fluent in them, but you've got knowledge across the spectrum.
Well, I've always been interested in helping kids along. When I lived in Linfield before moving here 18 years ago, I volunteered, taught in the Linfield school system. And in fact, at one point, we got a grant through the AAVSO we got 9 mirror making kits and 18 kids in the school system. Every Friday afternoon, we'll be grinding mirrors. Wow. So I think they still use it in their astronomy program over there. So it was a great program. We got kids to build telescopes, taught them how to do it. Some of them kept them, some of them donated to the school, and their astronomy club still uses them.
There are astronomy clubs all over the North Shore, and what I have found is amateur astronomers, anyway, are more than willing to let you look through their eyepiece and take a look at stuff.
Sure.
It's great.
Yeah, we have GAC right here in Gloucester.
Okay. Yep. I don't know anything about radio telescopes, and just observing, going out and looking at the night sky is fantastic. But that said, trying to look at the night sky, you have written about light pollution, and I always equated light pollution with trying to look up at the night sky. But it's much more than that, and it even involves good health.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I will admit, back in the 80s, my interest in light pollution was due to the obscuration of the sky, and that's still a major problem. But in the early 90s, I read, being a physician and a researcher, I couldn't help but notice some new articles coming out, primarily by Richard Stevens. He was an epidemiologist at University of Connecticut, UConn, and he was trying to figure out why breast cancer rates in the U.S. were higher than breast cancer rates in China, and why people who live in China who immigrated to the U.S. suddenly developed breast cancer, whereas it's not highly unknown in China itself. In China, it's much more. It's not pollution, ordinary pollution, chemicals and stuff, which is what everyone assumed, because China is far more polluted than we are in terms of water and air and all that. And looking at all the factors, he finally came down to the conclusion that it seems the breast cancer rates were higher wherever there was excess lighting. And that was the beginning of all this. I was intrigued by that. So we ended up striking up a conversation, and he postulated a number of tests By the way, I'd say past tense because he died 2 years ago, unfortunately. He postulated a number of tests that would prove that his hypothesis was correct. And over the past 35 years, numerous researchers around the world have done basic research that have basically proven all those. So it's no longer a hypothesis. The best one is just recently the 110,000 strong nurses study, which was published by Harvard, followed nurses over 20 years. And I mean, it followed a number of health habits of nurses, but one of the things it looked at was the degree of local light pollution by dividing all the 110,000 nurses into quintiles of going from worst light polluted areas where people live to the least. And there's a steady progression rise of breast cancer if you live in the worst light polluted areas to the lowest amount in areas that have the least light pollution. So, and that's a very well documented study, very well done. It's been published in Lancet and a few other places. So, and then there are, and it's not just one study. I now have 20 studies from around the world that all show the same thing. So when you have 20 studies, most of them are pretty well done. Some are not as deep. That all show the same thing. You can't call it hypothesis anymore. It's on pretty firm ground.
Is there a solution to that?
Yeah, it's really not that difficult if you think about it. Just first of all, let's correct one misconception I get asked all the time. Light doesn't cause cancer. Light suppresses melatonin at night. Your pineal gland in the center of your brain produces melatonin. Melatonin rises at night when you're asleep and decreases significantly when you're awake and you have blue light. Melatonin at night, when you're asleep, the main reason we sleep is so the body can go through a regenerative cycle, gets rid of bad cells, kills off we develop cancers all the time. Okay, every person listening to this, developed 8 to 10 cancer cells a day, all the time. But our immune system recognizes it as a bad cell and kills it. You have T killer cells, and you have, I don't want to get into a medical lecture here, but you have adjuvant cells that help those T killer cells recognize the bad cells and kill them. The problem is one of the adjuvants is melatonin. So if you don't produce melatonin, you're diminishing the immune system's ability to do its job. So it's no stretch of the imagination to say if you're diminishing your immune system, then occasionally some of those bad cells won't get killed, break through, and that's the mechanism. So it's not the light itself, it's the effect of the light, which is to suppress melatonin. And that's the basic mechanism that's going on here. So how do you combat that, which is your question? I want to answer that. First, avoid blue light at night. Okay, it's a very strange system how they rate light bulbs, but they use what's called a Kelvin scale. It goes back to the 18th century. If you put a hot iron poker in a fire and it gradually turns dull red, then bright red, then orange, and then white. Okay, they still use that scale, even though it has nothing to do with lights. But I can't get around that. We have to talk the lighting industry's system. So they use that Kelvin scale. And to put things in perspective, the surface of the sun is 6,200 CCT, correlated temperature. A lot of light bulbs out there are 4,000 K, which are way too blue. About 30 to 40% of the light by that is blue. What we have in Gloucester, by the way, we got a light pollution law passed many years ago when I first moved here. Under Mayor Bell, if you remember him. Mm-hmm. He put me on an energy committee and it led to 3,000 K. So we suggested that the best at the time they had was 3,000 K. And that has about 21% blue. Nowadays, they have lights all the way down to 2,400 K, which is much lower in blue, and I would recommend those. So if you have excess blue light, that suppresses melatonin the most. Blue is 10 times more effective at suppressing melatonin than red. So the first thing you do is don't at night use excess blue light. Second thing you do is shield lights so they don't shine in your eyes for driver safety. And that way they don't, because any light that goes in your eye is not helping you. If you're driving with lights in your eyes, your pupils constrict and you see worse. So they should be shielded. Lights needs to bounce off something for you to see that object, not go directly in your eye. And finally, don't excess light. Don't use, most people don't realize that there's a 4-to-1 ratio. So the old incandescent lamp, for the same amount of wattage, you cut down the wattage by 75% in order to get the same amount of lumens, which is what you want. Many localities don't understand that. So many cities, they have 60-watt bulbs. They get 50 or 60-watt LEDs. Now they have 4 to 5 times as much light as they started with, and it looks like the surface of the sun at night. Fortunately, we didn't make that mistake in Gloucester. There was a little reluctance at first, but what we have on the side streets is 19-watt, 3000K shielded lights, which is the right thing to do. Although nowadays I would go for more 27 to 2400. So to answer your question, it's really very simple. Don't overlight, shield the lights, and avoid blue. That's all there is to it. And it's not that difficult to achieve.
And I'm going to pull my curtains down at night now. Okay. All right. Thank you for all of that. I didn't know, I knew very little bit about that and why it affects and so on. It's very, very informative. What about, let's go back to space. You have an asteroid named after you. Please tell me about that.
Okay. Well, I'm a member of the American Astronomical Society, the professional organization. They admitted me because I do collaborative research with several groups. One is the MIT group on high energy astrophysics, and one is the Harvard group, the Center for Astrophysics. Several researchers there. Occasionally, they need research by some observations of something. And if you're a professional or you're a grad student and you need something fairly quickly, and you try to schedule for their West Coast large observatories, you may be put on a waiting list for 6 months. So I have the ability that my own boss. So if they make a request and they need something fairly quickly, and it's a good enough project, I'll say, sure, I'll get the data. So I've done a number of collaborative projects that way.
All right. By the way,
I decided to reward me with an asteroid because of that. Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
it says my internet connection is unstable. So am I. I can hear you, but your screen is frozen. There you go. Are you still with me? There you go. It's frozen. Okay. Let me see if I can get this moving.
Okay. It's still frozen on my screen.
All right. Yeah, it's jumping all around. Oh,
Says your bandwidth is low.
Not surprising. All right. I think you're back now. No. All right. You know what? Let me I can hear you. I'll tell you what, Dr. Motta, let me see if I can email you and we can finish this conversation over the phone, if you don't mind.